In the last lecture, we talked about how fighting has started between the British and the colonists at Lexington and Concord. Now, blood has been shed now, so the war has begun. What you have to keep in mind is that this fighting that happened at Lexington and Concord really kind of just happened with a group of militiamen, stopping the British from trying to capture those weapons and supplies up at Concord. But war hasn't been declared, and now the Second Continental Congress has to decide if there's going to be peace or if there's going to be war. Well, these guys, they're still not ready to, actually start a war. So they do one last desperate attempt for peace. And what they do is they write the Olive Branch Petition. The Olive Branch Petition. And in this petition, they declare the loyalty to the king, King George III, and they ask the king to repeal the intolerable acts. Well, as you might well imagine, King George III is furious. How dare these colonials dare tell me how to run my empire? So he does not address their issues. In fact, he orders 20,000 more troops to the colonies to crush this uprising. Now, as the Second Continental Congress is trying to, send this Olive Branch Petition, this overture for peace to England, Ethan Allen, who is kind of a hard-drinking, mountain guy from Vermont, decides on his own he is going to attack and take Fort Ticonderoga. Fort Ticonderoga is probably the most important fort in all of North America. It was originally built by the French. It's very imposing. Some people have called it the Gibraltar of North America. And it sits on a very important waterway. It sits right on the southern border of Lake Champlain. And it controls movement up and down the Hudson River. This is a very key strategic location. And Ethan Allen, on his own, without orders from the Continental Congress, decides to attack this fort. He is also joined by Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold, as you will later find out, really was one of the greatest generals we had until he betrays our country. Now, Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys lead this attack on the fort. And when they get to the fort, they overwhelm the guard and start banging on the door. And they say, "Come out, you old rat," to the British commander. And he replies, "By whose authority?" And Ethan Allen says, "By great Jehovah," which is God, and the Continental Congress, which actually is not true. The Continental Congress has not ordered Ethan Allen to take Fort Ticonderoga. Which means when the king reads the Olive Branch Petition, he's getting a mixed signal. Do they want peace or do they want war? So Ethan Allen kind of aggravates the situation by attacking Fort Ticonderoga. But one good thing about it for the Americans is that they capture a large supply of cannons and ammunition, which they are desperately short of. And it also gives America that key route into Canada. Let's go ahead and pause for a second and talk about the Patriots. Now, the Second Continental Congress is authorized to start an army, and they named George Washington its commander. Now, how would you like this job? Okay, George, we're going to make you the commander of the Continental Army. And you have a very simple job. You have one job, and that job is to defeat the mightiest empire on earth. And by the way, your troops are going to be poorly trained and obviously poorly equipped. And other than that, hey, good luck. So Washington takes this job. I mean, that's a lot of courage to take this ragtag bunch of colonists to go up against the mighty British Empire. Now, few of his troops are willing to enlist or to join the army more than a few months. They have fields to plow or business to run or farms to take care of. So they're willing to only enlist for a few months. They also say, hey, I'm more than willing to fight right here in Massachusetts or Connecticut or Rhode Island. The British come here, man, I'm ready to fight them. But they don't want to travel away from their colonies, many of them. And they certainly do not want to fight with men from other colonies. We're Massachusetts men. We're not going to fight with New Yorkers. So that is obviously some disadvantages. They're poorly trained, poorly equipped. They're not going to join for very long, and they want to fight near their homes. They do have some advantages, though. They owned rifles, and you're going to hear about Daniel Morgan later on. Daniel Morgan uses rifles. They're grooved. They have longer range, more accurate than the British muskets. And they're good shots. You know, they're used to defending their homes, their property, and they hunt. Turns out that the Americans have very good leadership. It certainly doesn't look that way at the beginning with Washington. Washington turns out to be a wonderful leader. And even more of an advantage, I believe, is that these people are fighting to defend their homes, their land, their way of life. I mean, if you knew that you had to defend your family, your home, I'm sure you're going to fight a little bit harder than these British troops who are there really probably against their will. They've been ordered there. So they are determined to protect their homes and land, which obviously is going to give you a large advantage. Now let's look at the British. The British are by far the most powerful army, nation, navy in the world. They're highly trained and equipped. The king and parliament has spared no money on their equipment. Without a doubt, Great Britain is the naval power of the world. It is, without a doubt, the best navy, bar none, in the world. And they also have support of many of the colonists. When this war begins, you're going to find out that a third of the colonists support the Patriot cause, but a third of them support the king. They're loyalists. And the other third are really, they just want to get involved. Whatever, just leave me alone. I have business to run. I really don't care. So at the beginning, a third of all the people that live in the colonies do support Great Britain. Now, their disadvantages are they have a very long supply line. So 3,000 miles from home to bring cannons and weapons and uniforms and the things that they need to conduct a war. It is also that 3,000 miles, it takes a long time to get orders to the army. There's no telegraphs yet. There's certainly no phones or emails. So messages and commands take a long time to reach the British Army. So communication is going to be difficult with the King and Parliament. Finally, the British Army is risking attack every time it leaves the cities. When it's in the city, it can control its protection pretty well. But anytime it ventures away from the city, they are under constant threat of guerrilla tactics, of being sniped at behind walls and trees and rocks. So they risk attack from the colonists once they leave the city. So even though the British is by far the most powerful army in the world, absolutely the best navy in the world, they also have disadvantages. Well, after the fighting at Lexington and Concord, and when the Second Continental Congress is writing the Olive Branch Petition, militiamen from all over the colonies, especially in New England, begin to amass around Boston. So on June the 16th, 1775, there are several thousand militiamen outside of Boston. And their commander, by the way, General Washington, who has just been named the commander of the Continental Army, is not here. He has not been able to arrive in Boston yet. So Colonel Prescott is the commander of the militia around Boston. He orders his men to take Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill. As he gets to the top of Bunker Hill, he sees and notices a better location called Breed's Hill. Breed's Hill. Man, I can't write. Breed's Hill. Most of the fighting that we're going to talk about actually occurs on Breed's Hill. All right. So these positions, Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, gives the colonists a clear shot at Boston Harbor, where much of the Royal Navy is sitting. All right. Oh, I even put that right here. So they move to Breed's Hill, which is a better location. Now, General Howe, who is in command of the British Army in Boston, orders his men to take these two hills, basically to drive the rebels off these two hills. And this is a perfect example, once again, of British arrogance, British overconfidence, and how the British underestimate the colonial militia. So Howe orders 2,400 men, twice as many as the militia has, to storm up these hills, and he sends them in waves. In the first two waves, by the way, it's a hot day. The British are dressed in their red woolen uniforms. The first wave advances up the hill. Colonel Prescott orders his men not to fire until they get near to the top, and then he unleashes on them. And they are just blown back down the hill. General Howe orders the second group to advance. Now you have to remember, the second group has just watched the first group just get annihilated. But theirs is not to reason why, theirs is but to do or die. So the second column begins to march up the hill where they meet the same fate. So Howe orders a third assault up the hill. Again, I mean, this should show you something or tell you something about the British discipline and bravery. The third unit has seen the first two units just massacred on Breed's Hill. But the third assault begins. And what happens is the colonists begin to lose, run out of shot, out of gunpowder, and the third assault is successful. They're able to drive the colonial militia off Breed and Bunker's Hill. Okay, but at what cost? The British lose 1,000 men and 81 officers. They're going to lose more officers on this engagement more than any other time in the war. And we shoot their officers, remember. The Patriots lose about 400. But General Howe has let a great chance to end this war once and for all get away from them. We'll talk about that at the end of this lecture. All right. Now, so Breed and Bunker's Hill is actually considered a British victory, but man, it cost the British dearly. All right. Now, the Patriot Army continues to grow outside of Boston. All right. And by January of 1776, there are 16,000 men just outside of Boston. And guess what arrives finally? All those cannons from Fort Ticonderoga that Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold have captured. It's taken them approximately 8 months to drag these cannons over the Appalachians to reach Dorchester Height, which is hills that run outside of Boston. General Howe recognizes that with these cannons and with these 16,000 men, that he is no longer able to defend Boston. So he leaves. He loads up his troops and takes 1,000 loyalists, people that are loyal to the British Crown, to Halifax, Canada. And amazingly enough, the militia have driven the mighty British Empire out of Boston. Okay, so here's some pictures of Breed and Bunker's Hill. Here's the colonial militia at the top of the hill. These pictures right here, this one right here, and this picture right here shows the British marching up the hill and being basically slaughtered. The picture I really want you to pay attention to is this bottom picture right here. Here's Breed's and Bunker's Hill. The Royal Navy is sitting outside, around Boston Harbor. You'll notice, though, that Breed and Bunker's Hill sits on a peninsula. General Howe orders his men this way up these hills. Okay, but if General Howe had ordered his men to attack here and here, he would have been able to cut off the colonial basically retreat once they run out of weapons and ammunition, gunpowder and ammunition. All these colonial militia do is just retreat back down this peninsula. If Howe had not ordered his men up this hill, but rather attacked from behind, flanked him, they could have cut off the retreat. They could not have swam away. The British Navy's out here in the harbor, and they could have probably utterly destroyed Colonel Prescott and all those colonial troops that were on Breed and Bunker's Hill. So here's the first example of how the British basically underestimate the colonial militia when it comes back to bite them.